Hi, this is Shahida Hill, getting you over the hill to home ownership and helping you confidently buy your first home. Today, we're talking about possession. So, when are you going to actually take occupancy of the home after you close? So, I'm going to talk about two options, and one of those options may help you in a multiple offer situation. So, number one is at closing. So at closing, the seller gives you the keys and you can move into the house right after closing. Okay. That is the ideal scenario that you get the keys, the seller's already moved out, and you move in. Now, for new construction, at closing is typically always when you take possession. For resale, however, then it could vary a little bit. Ideally, again, you want, even with resale, to take possession at closing. Now, how do you know that they moved out? Because you're going to perform a walkthrough 24 hours to 48 hours before closing. Sometimes you even want to go the day of closing. So I've done that before where we did the walkthrough 48 hours. They were moving, but they weren't fully moved out. So we did a walkthrough, say the closing was at 11. We did another walkthrough at 9 just to verify that they were out of the home. So ideally, again, you want possession at closing, and that will be in your contract. So if possession is at closing, it'll be in your contract that at the closing, you will take possession of the home. The seller should bring the keys. So you would have keys to the property. Sometimes they'll bring the garage door openers, anything you need to get inside the home. They'll bring the mailbox key if you're in like a condo or a townhome situation. They should give you anything that you need to occupy the residence. Any alarm codes, anything like that, they should give you at closing. Now, option number 2 is after closing. So, and I've done this recently. It's, again, not ideal, but I did this last month. I had 5 closings. I've only had 1 closing this year that was after closing. So occupancy after closing. And it was last month. And this is why we decided to do occupancy after closing. And that was a unique situation. The seller did not have a house yet. They were looking for a house, but their house was on the market. Now, they had multiple offers. So I asked my client, did they want to give them, to get their offer accepted, did they want to give them occupancy after closing? And he decided that he did. Now, how long did they want after closing? At first, they wanted, I think originally the listing agent asked for, I want to say, almost 3 weeks, something crazy. She asked for 3 weeks after closing to occupy the property. So that wasn't going to happen. But I said, you know what? They were in the process of looking for a house, another house, a larger home, and they hadn't found it yet. And I told her, let's go ahead and go under contract. Let's have a closing date. And then when you find them a house, we'll renegotiate the closing and then we'll go ahead and close. And we'll give you a temporary occupancy, giving them enough time to move out if you will accept our offer. So she agreed. We wrote the contract, and we agreed to give them, at the time, I think it was a week. And then, but that was originally. But then once she found them a house, we renegotiated the contract to give them 4 days to move out. Now, it's very, so it's in the contract. We have a temporary occupancy agreement. And my client allowed them to stay for free for those 4 days. So they closed on, say, a Tuesday, and they were going to take occupancy on Saturday. So in between this time, they're moving out of the house. Now, we did do a temporary occupancy agreement that if they stayed over that amount of time, then it would be $300 per day. Now, that's something in the contract where you can write in anything. You want to make it, depending on your state, you want to make it more expensive than it could be if they were to find like a nice hotel or Airbnb to stay in. So whether you need to make it $500 a day, $1,000 a day, make it something where they think, okay, if I stay past the agreed upon time, then the penalty will be so high that I might as well just stay in a hotel for a little while instead of paying these fees to stay over. So we did have that in place. Now, Some other things, so we really did it to get our offer accepted in a multiple offer situation. So again, it's not ideal because then you have those 4 days where you're like, okay, I hope you're moving out. I hope there's not going to be any issues. It's kind of nerve wracking during that time. So the seller did move out on that day. They were a little bit late. They were supposed to be out by 5. I think they were out about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock because their move took a little bit longer. And then their other closing was delayed as well. So they had to find somewhere to stay in between that time. But again, my client was happy because they were able to get the house. They were able to, overcome the multiple offers. They got a decent deal on the home. And that's one of the things you may want to consider as one of the other options to get your offer accepted, particularly when you're thinking about older people. Sometimes older people, they don't know what the next step is. They may have to sell their home, but they're looking for another property. If you can give them, whether paid or unpaid, if you can give them a little bit more time to move, that might put your offer over somebody else's offer. So other things you need to put in place. So you need to put some kind of per day penalty if they stay over the recommended time. You also can have money held in escrow. Depending on how competitive it is, you may or may not want to ask for this, but you could have money held at closing in escrow by the closing attorney if they do not leave on time. That would go to you. So that's what you want to do. You want to just play it by ear to think, is this something I want to offer in order to get my offer accepted? But in general, 99% of the time, the ideal thing for you to do is take possession at closing. But if you think it'll put your offer in a better standing, depending on the situation, you could offer the seller possession after closing. But definitely make sure you are still doing walkthrough. Like we still did a walkthrough 2 days prior. We still kind of followed up to make sure they were moving out. At closing, I got the seller's cell phone number. We made sure, we drove past the house to make sure they were actually moving out. So we tried to do as much due diligence as possible. We had the closing attorney explain to them the temporary occupancy agreement at closing so they understood there was a penalty if they stayed over the agreed upon time. I tried to cover all of my bases because this is something, again, I don't normally do, but my client really wanted this house. We wanted to get our offer accepted. And, something that you can negotiate depending on the circumstances, because again, all transactions are different and you have to see what you're comfortable with. Now, let me say this to close. If they did not leave, so say they did not leave by at the agreed upon time, not only is that that penalty that they're going to be charged, but on your end, if they're really just not leaving, you have to evict them in most states. So check your laws in your states, but then they become a holdover tenant, and you have to evict them. And that's a whole nother process. That's why it's not ideal to do possession after closing. So, but you want to make sure if you decide to do this, you want to make sure you have as much risk mitigation things in play as possible. The escrow agreement, the temporary occupancy, the penalty, whatever you can do to make it less risk on your end, you want to make sure you do that. With the temporary occupancy, my client still does get the keys at closing. They can occupy, they can't move in with them, but they could, start moving things in. They could have contractors come by. So the next step was going to be, if they didn't leave, make it very uncomfortable for them if they didn't leave by that time. But just another option, if you're thinking of, how can I get my offer approved? If you have a seller who's kind of nervous about selling, they might have their house on the market, but they don't want to accept an offer because maybe they haven't found another house yet. So you can try to be flexible in that way. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments.